The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Survival Academy's main courtyard as students from 17 different species gathered for their practical exam briefing. Instructor Kickstall stood before the assembled class, a crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the pale orange light of Kepler 442b's distant star, her forearms gesturing precisely as she spoke in the universal translator's flat tone that somehow conveyed her species' natural authority. This semester's major examination will test everything you have learned about primitive survival techniques, she announced, her compound eyes sweeping across the nervous faces before her. You will have exactly 48 hours to construct adequate shelter using only the basic tools we provide and whatever materials you can find in the designated wilderness zone. A high ripple of anxiety passed through the student's brain, whose blue-scale body required constant moisture, immediately worried about finding water sources on land, his gill slits fluttering with stress as he calculated the challenges ahead. Cormuth, a massive silicon-based student whose body moved with geological slowness, felt confident about the structural aspects but concerned about the time limit, his crystalline thoughts processing at a rate that seemed glacial to carbon-based life forms. Thissa, an avian student with iridescent feathers and an obsessive need for perfection, had already begun sketching preliminary designs in her datapad, her mind racing through architectural principles she had memorized from 7 different textbooks. At the back of the group, Jake Morrison leaned against a stone pillar with his hands in his pockets, his expression relaxed and curious rather than worried. He was the only human in the class, perhaps the only human enrolled in this particular institution, and his presence still caused some confusion among species who were just getting used to humanity's recent arrival in the galactic community. Kickstall continued her explanation with methodical precision. Your shelter must be waterproof enough to withstand rain, provide adequate protection from local weather conditions, and house one occupant comfortably, she detailed. Additionally, you must demonstrate competent fire-starting ability and secure at least one food or water source within your site area. She paused to let the requirements sink in. Grading will be based on structural integrity, efficient use of resources, and completion time, Kickstall added, her antennae twitching slightly. I must emphasize that this is a 48-hour assignment for very good reasons. Previous students who rushed through construction found their shelters collapsing during the evaluation period. Jake raised his hand, which caused several students to turn and stare, because humans still seemed oddly informal compared to most galactic species. Yes, human Morrison, Kickstall acknowledged. Are there any restrictions on what we can build or what materials we can use? Jake asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than challenging, like, is there a maximum size or a list of forbidden techniques? Kickstall's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. There are no restrictions beyond the time limit and the requirement to use only primitive technology, she replied. You may build whatever you believe will fulfill the assignment parameters. Jake nodded and settled back against the pillar, seeming satisfied with the answer. Thissa, overhearing this exchange, made a note in her datapad that the human was clearly trying to find loopholes, which she found simultaneously annoying and concerning because it suggested he might attempt something dangerous or foolish. You will be provided with one basic fire-starting kit, one primitive cutting tool, and one length of cordage, Kickstall continued. Everything else must be improvised from natural materials transport to the wilderness zone begins in 1 hour. Prepare your personal supplies and meet at the departure platform. The students dispersed to gather their minimal allowed possessions in the preparation area. Thissa had already laid out her belongings with mathematical precision. 1 water container, 1 thermal regulation garment, 1 medical kit, and her precious notebook filled with diagrams and calculations she had been developing for weeks in anticipation of this test. She watched with barely concealed disdain as Jake simply grabbed a water bottle and what appeared to be a worn jacket, adding nothing else to his small pack. "You are aware this is a 48-hour examination," Thesis said, unable to help herself. Her feathers ruffling with concern masked as criticism. Jake looked up and smiled in that peculiar way humans did when trying to be friendly. "Yeah, should be interesting," he replied easily. "My grandfather used to take me on week-long camping trips with even less gear than this. It'll be nice to have actual tools to start with." Thesa blinked her large eyes in confusion. "Your family made you survive in wilderness conditions as a juvenile?" she asked, uncertain whether to be horrified or impressed. "Well, not made exactly," Jake said, shouldering his pack. "It was fun. We'd hike out into the mountains or forests, build shelters, catch fish, identify edible plants, that kind of thing." My grandfather said it was important to know how to take care of yourself if modern technology failed. "Your species does this recreationally." Thesa's voice came out higher than she intended. "Some of us, yeah," Jake confirmed. "There's a whole community of people who practice primitive skills just for the challenge and enjoyment of it. Some folks spend years learning how to make everything from scratch." Thesa decided the human was either lying or insane, possibly both, and returned to her meticulous preparations. Cormath, who had been slowly gathering his supplies nearby, rumbled a question in his deep, grinding voice. "Human Jake, your world must be very dangerous if children learn survival skills." Jake considered this as he checked his water bottle. "Earth has some challenging environments." "Sure," he acknowledged. "Deserts, jungles, Arctic regions, mountains. But honestly, I think humans just like solving problems and proving we can handle difficult situations. It's kind of built into how we think." Rin approached, his movements careful to conserve moisture. "I have been researching your species since you joined our class," the aquatic student said, his translator rendering his bubbling speech into understandable words. "The information suggests humans evolved on what the galactic community classifies as a Class 7 death world. Is that bad?" Jake asked. "It means your planet has extreme environmental variation, numerous apex predators, frequent natural disasters, and high gravity by galactic standards," Rin explained. "Most species develop on Class 3 or Class 4 worlds with stable, predictable conditions." Jake shrugged. "I guess that explains why we're pretty adaptable," he said. "When your environment keeps trying to kill you in new and creative ways, you either learn to deal with change or you don't survive long enough to have kids." The transport announcement echoed across the preparation area, calling all students to the departure platform as they boarded the hover transport that would take them to the wilderness zone. Jake found himself seated near the viewing window, watching the academy's buildings give way to rolling hills covered in purple-tinged vegetation that reminded him of lavender fields back on Earth. Instructor Kickstall made one final announcement over the transport speaker system. "Remember that this test is designed to challenge you." Her voice carried clearly over the engine hum. "Adequate completion is the goal. Attempting to exceed parameters often results in structural failure or resource depletion. Focus on meeting requirements, not on impressing your instructors." Jake gazed out at the wilderness ahead, his mind already sorting through techniques and priorities, planning his approach with the casual competence of someone who had done similar tasks dozens of times before. He didn't notice Thesa watching him with suspicious eyes, wondering why the human looked so relaxed when facing what she considered to be one of the most demanding tests of their academic careers. The wilderness zone stretched across a valley bordered by gentle hills, with a clear stream running through the center and mixed forest coverage, providing ample building materials. Each student received their starting kit, and was assigned a numbered sector roughly 1 kilometer apart, ensuring privacy during the evaluation period while keeping everyone within reasonable distance for safety monitoring. Thesa immediately began her systematic approach, pulling out her carefully prepared notes and conducting what she called a comprehensive site analysis before touching a single branch. She walked the perimeter of her assigned sector 4 times, measuring distances with careful wingspans, noting the position of the sun, evaluating soil drainage, and cataloging available resources with the intensity of someone preparing to build a permanent structure rather than a temporary shelter. After 90 minutes of analysis, she finally selected her building location on a slight rise that would provide drainage, positioned to receive morning sun while avoiding afternoon heat. Her wings trembled slightly with satisfaction as she sketched her final design. A traditional A-frame structure using the principles her people had perfected over millennia, engineered to exact specifications with calculated load-bearing ratios. Meanwhile, Cormath had chosen a location near a rock formation, moving with his characteristic geological patience as he began the slow process of clearing ground. His silicon-based body didn't experience fatigue the way carbon-based life forms did, but everything he did happened at a pace that seemed frozen to outside observers. He lifted one stone, placed it carefully in his growing foundation pile, then paused for what seemed like minutes before selecting the next one, his crystalline mind processing structural considerations with absolute thoroughness. Vryn struggled immediately with the dry environment. His blue scales, designed for semi-aquatic life, required regular moisture, and the air felt uncomfortably arid against his skin. He had wisely chosen a sector adjacent to the stream, and his first priority became creating a shelter that would maintain humidity while providing the required weather protection. His webbed fingers worked awkwardly with the primitive tools, designed as they were for species with different manipulation appendages. But he persevered with determined concentration. 6 hours into the assignment, Instructor Kickstall began her first round of check-ins. Curious to observe how each student approached the challenge, she visited Thesa first. Finding the avian student had completed her resource gathering and was beginning to construct the frame of her shelter with precise, measured movements. Excellent planning, Cadet Thesa, Kickstall observed, her antennae approving. Your foundation layout shows sophisticated understanding of weight distribution. This is feathers fluffed with pride. Thank you, Instructor, she replied formally. I estimate completion in 36 hours if weather conditions remain favorable. Kickstall moved on to Cormath's sector, where the silicon-based student had successfully cleared his building area and established a foundation of carefully selected stones. Progress was slow but absolutely methodical, and Kickstall noted with satisfaction that what Cormath built would likely outlast everyone else's shelters by several centuries, given his species' approach to construction. Vryn had managed to create a framework using flexible branches near the stream bank. Though he looked exhausted from working in the dry air, the instructor made a note to monitor him more closely, as aquatic species sometimes struggled with extended land-based activities. Then, she arrived at Jake Morrison's sector. What she found made her stop and recalibrate her observations. The human had already completed a basic lean-to structure, its frame solidly constructed and leaning against a sturdy tree for support. More surprisingly, he had a fire burning in a carefully prepared pit lined with stones, the flames crackling cheerfully as smoke rose into the evening air. Jake was sitting cross-legged beside the fire, using what appeared to be a handmade tool to scrape bark from a length of wood. Cadet Morrison, Kickstall said, her surprise evident even through the translator's neutral tone. You have made significant progress. Jake looked up and smiled, setting aside his work. Hey, Instructor Kickstall, he greeted her casually. Yeah, I wanted to get the basics done before dark. It's always easier to build with good light. The instructor's compound eyes examined the shelter structure with professional assessment. The lean-to was simple but soundly constructed, using principles that showed practical understanding rather than theoretical knowledge. The supports were lashed together with what looked like hand-twisted cordage rather than the provided rope. You created your own binding material, she observed. The cordage you gave us is great, but I figured I should save it for more critical applications, Jake explained, picking up a length of twisted plant fiber. There's a plant growing near the stream with really strong fibers. Once you separate and dry them, you can twist them into pretty decent rope. Kickstall picked up the cordage with one of her 4 hands, testing its strength. It was crude compared to manufactured materials, but definitely functional. And your fire, she continued, noting the bow drill apparatus resting near the pit. You chose not to use the provided fire starting kit. Well, I used it once to get this going faster, Jake admitted, but I wanted to make sure I could start fire without it. You know, just in case. Plus, making the bow drill gave me practice with the knife and helped me understand what wood types work best in this environment. He gestured to several pieces of wood arranged near the fire. That darker wood creates great coals for cooking. The lighter stuff burns fast for quick heat, and those thin pieces work perfectly for kindling, he explained with the ease of someone discussing familiar topics. Kickstall noticed something roasting on a flat stone positioned near the flames. You have secured food already, she noted. Just some tubers I found growing near the water, Jake said, using a stick to turn them. They matched the description of a safe edible species from the ecology briefing we got last week. Figured I should test them early in case they cause any digestive issues. The instructor felt a growing sense of disorientation. This human had accomplished in 6 hours what she expected to see after 20 hours from an above-average student. Have you constructed tools beyond what was provided? She asked. Noticing several shaped objects arranged near his shelter, Jake picked up a hand axe he had made by hafting a sharp stone to a wooden handle using the plant fiber cordage and what appeared to be pine resin. Just some basics, he said, offering the tool for inspection. A proper axe makes processing wood much faster than using the knife, and I started a couple of baskets for carrying materials and storing food. He indicated 2 partially woven containers sitting in the grass. Kickstall examined the hand axe, noting the secure binding and the carefully selected stone that had been shaped to create a functional cutting edge. Cadet Morrison, I must ask, did you have prior knowledge of this test site? She inquired, trying to understand how he could work with such efficiency. No, ma'am, Jake replied honestly. First time seeing this area was when we landed today. Why, your progress substantially exceeds typical 6-hour benchmarks, the instructor explained. Most students are still gathering materials or beginning basic framework at this point. Jake looked genuinely surprised. Really, he said, glancing at his lean-to. I mean, this is pretty basic stuff. I'm just following standard wilderness survival priorities. Shelter, water, fire, food. I figured I'd get these sorted quick so I can improve the shelter tomorrow and maybe work on some quality of life upgrades. Quality of life upgrades? Kickstall repeated. You know, better sleeping platform, maybe a proper door. Improved ventilation, Jake elaborated. I've got like 38 hours left. Seemed wasteful to just sit around once the minimum requirements were met. The instructor filed this conversation away for a later analysis. Continue with your work, Cadet, she said finally. I will return for formal evaluation at the 48-hour mark. As she walked back toward the monitoring station, Kickstall found herself reconsidering her assumptions about human capabilities. 8 hours into the assignment, word had begun to spread among the students' thesis working by the light of her emergency lamp as darkness fell. Heard from another student that the human had already completed a shelter and established a fire. She refused to believe it. He must have cut corners, she insisted, her feathers ruffling with indignation. Proper construction requires planning, precise measurements, structural calculations. He probably built something that will collapse at the first strong wind. But doubt crept into her thoughts as she continued her own careful construction, moving slowly to avoid errors in the darkness. 12 hours into the assignment, most students were roughly 25% complete. With their basic shelter frameworks, Cormath had established an impressive stone foundation and was methodically building walls with the patience of geological time. Rin had created a framework and was working on waterproofing, using mud and plant materials, his movements sluggish from dehydration despite regular trips to the stream. Thesa had her frame completed and was beginning to add the roof supports, checking each measurement multiple times before committing. And Jake Morrison, having banked his fire for the night, slept comfortably. Dawn broke over the wilderness zone with soft orange light filtering through purple-tinged leaves. Instructor Kickstall began her 16-hour inspection rounds, expecting to find most students either sleeping after a night of work or continuing their construction efforts in the early morning light. She checked on Thesa first, finding the avian student adjusting roof supports with meticulous attention, her feathers disheveled from working through the night. Status report. Cadet Thesa, Kickstall requested. Framework is complete. Instructor, Thesa reported, her voice showing strain from exhaustion. I am beginning waterproofing phase now. I estimate completion by hour 40, which provides an 8-hour safety buffer for unexpected complications. The instructor noted Thesa's typical over-planning with approval. Cormath had made steady progress on his stone structure, the walls now reaching waist height for a human-sized being. Each stone placed with deliberate precision. Vrin appeared severely dehydrated despite being near water, his scales looking dull and dry. Cadet Vrin, report to medical station for hydration assessment, Kickstall ordered with concern. But the assignment, Vrin protested weakly. Your health supersedes evaluation requirements, the instructor insisted. You may continue after medical clearance. Then Kickstall made her way to Jake Morrison's sector, mentally preparing to provide guidance on improving his basic lean-to shelter. What she found caused her to stop completely, her antennae quivering with confusion. The simple lean-to from the previous evening had vanished. In its place stood a proper small structure with walls, made from a framework of wooden poles, interwoven with flexible branches and sealed with a mixture of mud and grass. The technique was called wattle and daub, Kickstall realized, recognizing it from historical construction methods studied in her architectural courses. The roof consisted of carefully layered plant materials, arranged in overlapping rows that would shed water efficiently, the whole thing angled to prevent pooling. But what truly shocked her was the stone-lined fireplace built into one wall with a chimney structure extending up through the roof. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney opening, indicating an active fire inside the shelter around the main structure. Jake had clearly been busy. Multiple tools hung from a rack made of lashed branches, several types of cutting implements, digging sticks, and what appeared to be a crude hammer. 3 woven baskets sat near the shelter entrance, one filled with gathered nuts, another with root vegetables, and a third containing an assortment of useful-looking materials near the stream. She spotted a small constructed pool with carefully arranged stones, creating a weir fish trap that used water flow to guide fish into an enclosed area. But perhaps most unexpected was the small cleared area where Jake had transplanted several edible plants in organized rows and scattered seeds that were already showing signs of careful watering. A garden. The Human had started a garden. Kickstal approached the shelter, her multiple feet moving carefully through what had become a small, organized homestead. Cadet Morrison, she called out. Jake emerged from the shelter, looking remarkably well-rested and carrying a flat piece of bark that served as a plate. Good morning, Instructor, he greeted cheerfully. Perfect timing. I just finished cooking breakfast, if you'd like some. On the bark plate sat what appeared to be cooked fish, garnished with some kind of green plant. You have made substantial modifications to your shelter, Kickstal stated, struggling to process the scene before her. Yeah, the lean-to was fine for sleeping, but I figured I should build something more substantial, Jake explained, gesturing toward the structure. The wattle and daub technique is pretty straightforward. Once you find good clay deposits, there's a nice source about 200 meters upstream. He took a bite of his fish before continuing. The chimney was a bit tricky since I wanted to make sure it would draw properly without filling the shelter with smoke, he admitted. I had to rebuild it once when the angle wasn't quite right. But it works great now. Keeps the interior warm and dry. Kickstal's mandibles worked silently as she tried to formulate a response. The fireplace construction alone would be considered an advanced project in our primitive technology courses. She finally managed. You completed this overnight. Well, I had good light from the fire, and honestly, once I got into a rhythm, it went pretty fast, Jake said. The hardest part was gathering enough suitable mud and letting it dry enough to hold shape. I ended up banking the fire hot to speed up the drying process. The instructor walked slowly around the structure, examining the craftsmanship. It was crude by modern construction standards, certainly, but it showed solid understanding of fundamental engineering principles and material properties. And these tools. She gestured toward the rack. Oh yeah, I figured having the right tools would make everything easier, Jake explained enthusiastically, moving to show her his collection. The axe I made yesterday works great, but I wanted some variation. This one is more like a hatchet for detail work. This is a wedge for splitting wood. And this curved blade works well for carving. He picked up each tool as he described it, demonstrating its function with practiced ease. The baskets were pretty simple. Just wove them from willow-type branches I found near the water, he continued. They're not beautiful, but they're functional for carrying stuff and storage. Kickstal examined the water collection system next, noting the careful arrangement that would filter debris while allowing water to flow. You have established multiple redundant water sources, she observed. Yeah, seems smart, Jake agreed. The stream is reliable, but having a collection system means I don't have to walk down there every time I need water. Plus, I set up that fish weir yesterday evening, caught 3 decent-sized fish already. That's what I had for breakfast. And the planted area, Kickstal's voice carried a note of disbelief. The garden, Jake confirmed. Walking over to the small plots, I found several edible plant species during my foraging yesterday, so I transplanted some to keep them close, easier than walking all over looking for food. He knelt down, pointing to different sections. These are the tubers I tested yesterday. They're good, so I saved some to replant, he explained. These leafy ones taste pretty good and grow fast from what I can tell, and I scattered some seeds from that nut-bearing tree over there to see if they'll sprout. Cadet Morrison, you understand, this is a 48-hour survival assessment, not a homesteading project, Kickstal said. Her translator struggling to convey her confusion, Jake stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. Right. But I've still got like 32 hours left, he pointed out reasonably. I mean, I could just sit around. But that seems boring. Figured I might as well keep improving things. What you have constructed here exceeds the requirements by a substantial margin, the instructor explained. Most students will consider themselves successful if they complete a basic waterproof shelter with functional fire and one food source. Oh, Jake looked genuinely surprised. I thought those were just the minimum requirements, like the baseline you needed to pass. He glanced back at his shelter with a critical eye. This is pretty basic survival stuff. Honestly, he continued. I mean, it's not like I've done any serious construction or established sustainable food production. This is just enough to be comfortable for a couple days. Kickstall felt her understanding of human capabilities shifting. You consider this basic? She asked carefully. Well, yeah, Jake replied. My grandfather used to say that survival is about more than just not dying. It's about maintaining quality of life and setting yourself up for long-term success. He gestured toward his various projects. So you build a good shelter, establish reliable food and water, make the tools you need to work efficiently, and organize your space so everything is accessible, he explained as if describing the most obvious things in the world. Then, if you're going to be somewhere for a while, you might as well plant some food sources and improve your living conditions. Your grandfather taught you these skills? Kickstall inquired. He taught me the basics, Jake confirmed. But there's a whole community of people on Earth who practice primitive skills. Some of them can do way more impressive stuff than this. He paused, considering. There are people who can make fire without any tools at all. Just friction from rubbing sticks together, he continued. And folks who can build permanent structures, forge metal tools, make pottery, weave cloth, all from raw materials. What I've done here is pretty simple compared to what serious survivalists can accomplish. Kickstall processed this information, her worldview expanding to accommodate this new data about human capabilities. How long did your grandfather take you on these wilderness excursions? She asked. Usually a week or two, Jake answered. Sometimes longer during summer breaks. We'd go out into remote areas and practice living with minimal gear. He said it was important to understand how our ancestors lived and to know that we could take care of ourselves if we ever needed to. And human children learn these skills recreationally. Kickstall confirmed what Thesa had mentioned earlier. Some do. Yeah, Jake said. It's not universal. But there's a pretty big outdoor education movement. Summer camps, wilderness schools, scout programs, lots of ways kids learn outdoor skills. The instructor stood silently for a moment, recalculating everything. The 48-hour mark approached with the setting sun casting long shadows across the wilderness zone. Instructor Kickstall prepared her evaluation materials, organizing her inspection schedule to visit each student systematically for final assessment. She decided to visit the other students first, wanting to process what she had seen at Jake Morrison's site before conducting his formal evaluation. Thesis sector appeared first on her route. The avian student stood beside her completed shelter with visible pride. Despite her exhaustion, her feathers meticulously preened. Despite 2 days of hard labor, the structure was impressive. An A-frame design with perfect symmetry. The frame constructed from carefully selected branches lashed together at precisely calculated angles. The roof consisted of overlapping layers of broad leaves arranged in a shingled pattern that would shed water efficiently. Interior support beams showed evidence of load calculations, positioned exactly where engineering principles dictated they should be. A small fire pit sat outside the shelter entrance, stones arranged in a neat circle with a carefully managed fire burning steadily nearby. A collection of edible berries and nuts rested in a woven basket that Thesa had clearly spent considerable time creating. Cadet Thesa. Final assessment. Kickstall announced formally. Thesa straightened, her wings folding precisely against her back. Shelter complete and ready for inspection. Instructor, she reported with military crispness. All requirements met according to specifications. Kickstall examined the structure thoroughly, testing joints, checking waterproofing, evaluating overall stability. It was excellent work. Structural integrity, superior, the instructor noted in her evaluation pad. Resource efficiency, excellent. Attention to detail, outstanding. She checked the fire starting capability, noting the bow drill apparatus Thesa had constructed along with a backup friction method. Fire starting competency, demonstrated with multiple methods. Kickstall continued her assessment. The food collection showed appropriate variety and knowledge of local edible species. Food security, adequate with multiple sources identified, she concluded. Overall evaluation. This represents exemplary work. Cadet Thesa, Kickstall stated formally, your shelter exceeds minimum requirements and demonstrates advanced understanding of primitive construction principles. Estimated score 112%. Thesa's feathers fluffed with satisfaction. Thank you, instructor, she replied, barely containing her pride. I worked very hard to ensure everything met proper standards. Your effort is evident and commendable. Kickstall acknowledged before moving to the next evaluation. Cormouth sector presented a dramatically different but equally impressive result. The silicon-based student had constructed what could only be described as a small fortress stone. Walls rose to shoulder height for a human-sized being. Each rock carefully selected and placed to interlock with its neighbors without need for mortar. The roof consisted of flat stone slabs supported by sturdy wooden beams, creating a structure that looked like it could withstand a significant storm or even minor seismic activity. Cormouth stood beside his creation with the quiet satisfaction of geological patience rewarded. Cadet Cormouth. Final assessment, Kickstall announced. Structure complete. Instructor, Cormouth rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. Built to endure. That was certainly accurate. Kickstall examined the stonework with professional appreciation for the craftsmanship. Each stone fit precisely with its neighbors. Weight distributed according to principles that would make the structure stable for decades, if not centuries. This is museum-quality stonework. Cadet, she noted, your species' natural affinity for construction is clearly evident. The fire pit showed competent if slow fire-starting ability, and food stores consisted of properly identified edible roots and minerals that Cormouth's silicon-based biology required. Overall evaluation. Excellent work demonstrating patience and superior craftsmanship. Kickstall recorded. Estimated score, 108%. Cormouth's crystalline body seemed to resonate with satisfaction at frequencies just below audible range. Rin's evaluation came next. Conducted at the medical station, where the aquatic student was recovering from severe dehydration. He had completed a basic shelter before his health forced withdrawal, and Kickstall evaluated it fairly, despite his inability to finish all requirements. The structure showed admirable effort given his environmental disadvantages, and she noted his determination in her report. Cadet Rin, you demonstrated commendable perseverance despite significant physiological challenges, she told him as he rested in a humidity-controlled recovery chamber. Your shelter was adequate and showed good problem-solving. Estimated score, 85% with allowances for environmental factors. Rin's gill slits fluttered. Weakly with relief, other students received similar evaluations. Most had completed functional shelters ranging from adequate to good, with scores falling between 70 and 105%. All had worked hard, demonstrated learning, and met basic requirements. Then Kickstall made her way to Jake Morrison's sector as the sun touched the horizon. What she found made her stop and simply stare. The sight had transformed into what could only be described as a primitive homestead. The main shelter had expanded since her morning visit. A Covered porch area now extended from the front, providing a dry workspace with log seats arranged around a central area. The stone fireplace and chimney she had observed that morning remained, but Jake had added a second structure, a small building constructed from vertical wooden poles with gaps between. Then that would allow smoke to circulate, a smokehouse for preserving meat and fish. The tool collection had grown, substantially organized on rack. She counted at least 15 different implements, various cutting tools, digging implements, wooden mallets, wedges, and what appeared to be crude but functional woodworking tools. The basket collection had multiplied to 7 containers of various sizes, each woven with increasing skill as Jake apparently practiced and improved his technique. The fish weir in the stream now had a companion structure, a series of small game snares positioned strategically around the perimeter. The garden plots had expanded, with multiple rows of transplanted edible plants showing signs of careful tending and watering. Irrigation channels connected the plots to the stream, demonstrating understanding of basic water management. But what caught Kickstal's attention most was the collection of pottery items drying in the sun, crude bowls, cups, and what appeared to be a storage vessel, all formed from clay and waiting to be fired. An animal hide was stretched on a wooden frame, partly scraped and treated with what smelled like a mixture of brains and other materials used in traditional tanning processes. Firewood sat in organized piles, sorted by size and type, enough to last for weeks. Jake emerged from the smokehouse, where he had apparently been arranging fish for preservation. "Hey, Instructor Kickstall," he greeted her with his characteristic casual friendliness. Right on time for the final inspection. Kickstall's translator struggled to convey her complete cognitive disconnect with what she was witnessing. "Cadet Morrison," she began, then paused, unsure how to proceed. "Perhaps you could provide me with a tour of your completed projects." "Sure thing," Jake agreed enthusiastically, clearly proud of his work. "So I finished the pottery pieces about 4 hours ago. They need to dry completely before I can fire them in the kiln I built over there." He pointed to a small structure made of clay and stones that Kickstall had not initially noticed. "The tanning process is going to take longer than 48 hours to complete properly, but I got it started," he continued, walking over to the stretched hide. "This is from a rabbit analog I caught yesterday. The meat is in the smokehouse along with about 3 kilos of fish." He guided her toward the smokehouse, opening the simple door to show rows of meat and fish hanging in the smoke from a carefully maintained low fire. Smoking preserves food by removing moisture and adding antimicrobial compounds from the smoke, Jake explained as if discussing a homework assignment. "It's one of the oldest food preservation techniques humans developed." Kickstall examined the interior setup, noting the thoughtful design that maintained optimal smoke density without creating too much heat. "The expanded shelter has a sleeping platform now." Jake continued his tour. "I stuffed a makeshift mattress with dried grass, and it's actually pretty comfortable. And I added some shelving for organizing supplies." The interior of the main shelter showed remarkable organization tools hung on wall pegs. Food stores sat in baskets on elevated shelves, safe from ground moisture and potential pests. And the sleeping platform looked genuinely comfortable with its grass-stuffed bedding. The fireplace radiated warmth, its chimney drawing perfectly to vent smoke through the roof. "I reinforced the roof this morning after we had that brief rain shower," Jake mentioned. "Added another layer of thatch and adjusted the angle slightly to improve water runoff. Works much better now outside." He showed her the irrigation system he had developed for the garden. The channels use gravity to distribute water from the stream to the planted areas, he explained. "It's not sophisticated, but it means I don't have to carry water manually for every plant." Kickstall noted at least 8 different plant species growing in organized rows. I experimented with some additional edible species. Instructor Kickstall sat in the faculty conference room surrounded by 7 other instructors, all staring at the evaluation data displayed on the central holographic screen. The numbers seemed impossible. Thesa, 112%. Cormuth, 108%. Various other students, 70 to 105%. Jake Morrison, 347%. The scoring system must be malfunctioning. Professor Velthan suggested, his tentacles waving in agitation. 347% completion is mathematically absurd. The system is functioning correctly. Kickstall replied calmly, though her antennae betrayed her own continued disbelief. I personally verified every element of the Humans project. She pulled up images of Jake's site on the display. The other instructors fell silent as the progression of images showed the evolution from empty wilderness to functional homestead over 48 hours. This is the work of one individual, Professor Mikthara asked, her crystalline voice resonating with skepticism. In 2 days, I observed him at 6-hour intervals. Kickstall confirmed. No assistance, no advanced technology, no violation of any parameters. Just one human student applying what he describes as basic survival skills, taught to him as a child. Din Survath, an elderly Vryn who had taught at the academy for 30 years, studied the images carefully. We have had human students before, he noted, his translator conveying confusion. None have demonstrated capabilities of this magnitude. I conducted research after the 16-hour inspection. Kickstall explained, pulling up additional data. Human capability varies substantially based on cultural background and individual training. Cadet Morrison comes from a culture that places value on what they call wilderness skills, and received extensive childhood education in primitive survival techniques. She displayed comparative data. Additionally, humans evolved on what galactic classification systems identify as a Class 7 death world. She continued. Their planet features extreme environmental variation, requiring adaptability to multiple climate zones, terrain types, and survival challenges. Professor Velthan's tentacles stilled as he processed this information. So this human's baseline for adequate shelter includes capabilities that we consider advanced achievement, he said. Slowly, precisely, Kickstall agreed. What Cadet Morrison constructed represents his species' minimum standard for temporary wilderness habitation. He genuinely believed of the assignment requirements were just the starting point. Dean Sorvath leaned forward. What did the human student say when you informed him his work exceeded expectations? He inquired. Kickstall mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. He asked if there were bonus points for additional projects, she replied. Then he suggested that if we wanted to see real primitive skills, we should observe what he called serious survivalists who can apparently establish permanent settlements with sustainable agriculture. The faculty sat in contemplative silence. We must revise our curriculum parameters, Dean Sorvath finally declared. If human baseline capabilities exceed our advanced standards, we need to create appropriate challenge levels. Agreed, Kickstall said. However, I believe there is a larger lesson here about assumptions and species-specific capabilities. Meanwhile, back in the student preparation area, Thesa confronted Jake directly. Her feathers were still ruffled from exhaustion, but indignation overrode her fatigue. You made everyone else look inadequate, she accused, her large eyes fixed on him intensely. Was that your intention, to embarrass the rest of us? Jake looked genuinely startled by her hostility. But no, he'd protested. I was just doing the assignment. You built a homestead. Thesis' voice rose. With multiple structures, food preservation systems, agriculture, and enough supplies to last for weeks. That is not just doing the assignment. But the assignment said to build shelter and secure food, Jake argued, confusion evident in his expression. It didn't say to build only the minimum or stop after meeting basic requirements. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Look, I didn't know what everyone else was going to do, he continued. I just approached it the way I was taught. You don't survive by doing the bare minimum. You survive by being prepared and continuously improving your situation. Cormath rumbled his way into the conversation, his stone-like body moving with deliberate purpose. Human Jake. Your people learn these skills as children, the Silicon-based student stated rather than asked. Some of us. Yeah, Jake confirmed. Not everyone. But it's pretty common in certain communities. My grandfather started teaching me when I was about 7 years old. 7 rotations. Thesis' feathers flattened with shock. That is barely past infancy for most species. Well, human kids are pretty capable, Jake said with a shrug. We start simple learning to identify plants, understanding basic fire safety, building small shelters, then gradually work up to more complex skills as we get older. Vrin, still recovering but mobile again, joined the discussion. I researched your home world after my health incident, he contributed, his gills fluttering. The information I found described Earth as having climate zones ranging from Arctic ice to tropical jungle, with deserts, mountains, forests, and grasslands all on one planet. Yeah, Earth's pretty diverse, Jake agreed. Most inhabited worlds have 1 or 2 dominant biomes, Rin continued. My home planet is 93% ocean with small island chains. The environmental consistency means we evolved for one specific niche. He paused, his translator conveying dawning realization. But humans evolved to handle multiple environments, he finished. Your survival skills must account for drastically different scenarios. I guess that makes sense, Jake said thoughtfully. I mean, my grandfather taught me cold weather, survival techniques, and desert survival. And forest skills we practiced in different environments because you never know what situation you might face. Thesis' indignation began to fade, replaced by reluctant curiosity. So when you say basic survival skills, you mean skills that allow your species to inhabit any environment, she clarified. Pretty much, Jake confirmed. Humans spread across our whole planet, adapting to whatever conditions we found: Arctic tundra, rainforests, deserts, mountains. We figured out how to survive and eventually thrive in all of them. Cormath's rumbling voice carried a note of respect. Your species are not specialists but generalists, he observed. You do not excel in one environment but can function adequately in many. That's a good way to put it, Jake agreed. We're pretty adaptable. It's kind of our thing. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement calling all students to the main lecture. Hall instructor Kickstall stood at the front of the assembled class, a crystalline form reflecting the overhead lights. I have completed evaluations of all student projects, she began formally. Overall, the class performance exceeded expectations with most students demonstrating competent primitive survival skills. She paused, her antennae sweeping across the room. However, this evaluation has revealed significant gaps in my own understanding of species-specific capabilities, she continued. I made assumptions about what constituted appropriate challenge levels based on my experience with previously enrolled species. Her compound eyes focused briefly on Jake before addressing the full class. Cadet Morrison's exceptional performance is not the result of rule-breaking or inappropriate advantages, Kickstall stated clearly. It represents the application of skills his species considers fundamental for wilderness survival skills that human children learn recreationally, murmurs spread. Through the student body, this teaches us an important lesson about diversity in capabilities, the instructor continued. What one species finds extremely challenging, another may consider routine. What seems impossible to one evolutionary path may be elementary to another. She pulled up comparative images showing different student shelters. Cadet Thessa built a structurally perfect shelter using engineering principles. Her species developed over millennia. Kickstall noted. Cadet Cormuth created stonework that could last centuries using techniques natural to silicon-based life forms. Cadet Morrison established a functional homestead using generalist survival strategies developed on a high-variation environment. The images rotated on the display. Each approach reflects the evolutionary pressures and cultural values of the respective species, she explained. There is no single correct way to survive. There are only strategies that prove effective in given contexts. Thessa found herself nodding slowly, her earlier anger transforming into genuine interest. Moving forward, the Academy will offer tiered challenge levels to accommodate different baseline capabilities, Kickstall announced. Standard survival courses will continue for most species, with an advanced track tentatively titled Human Standard Wilderness Survival for students who wish to push beyond typical parameters. Jake raised his hand. Yes. Cadet Morrison, Kickstall acknowledged. Would the advanced course cover things like permanent structure building and sustainable agriculture? He asked. Because those are really useful long-term survival skills. Several students turned to stare at him. You want more difficult assignments? Thessa asked incredulously. Well, I want to learn new things, Jake replied reasonably. The shelter assignment was fun, but I'd like to try techniques I haven't practiced before, maybe metalworking or advanced pottery or something. Kickstall's mandibles clicked again.